Paltrocast. Greg, thank you for taking the time. Before I give you a bunch of compliments, how's your day going aside from, having to speak to this jabroni?
No, it's very good. I'm happy to speak to you, buddy. It's going
Yeah,
real
so
well. Thank you.
when I say compliments here, I think I'm like most people where the first time I saw you was whose line is it anyway? Without realizing, hey, this guy is a stand-up. Because let's face it, most improv people are not great stand-ups. So then I finally see your stand-up. I think what really hipped me to you was the routine on Australia about how much they overcame to get there. But then the third thing that I appreciate about you, besides the craft and how you've evolved, is the new album cover to French Drug Deal is an homage to The Clash. So you go, this is a guy with great material who has great music taste. Now, did that bite you on the cover to French Drug Deal?
My wife took the picture outside of we were going to see Bob Dylan last year. And I went to a dispensary around the corner in Hollywood here. And that wall happened to be in front of the next door to the dispensary. So she took a picture of me. You can see if you look, I'm wearing a mask, or I've got a mask on because Dylan made you wear masks. So we went around and around about what to do with the album cover. And I took all these other pictures. And then we finally settled on this one. And after a minute of everybody offering me really awful ideas, I said, why don't we do the Clash cover from London Calling? And my wife and I went to college together as well. And I remember dancing with her to Train in Vain when we were just kids. And as of course, the Clash album is an homage to an Elvis Presley album as well. So people, and you're not the only person, Darren. People come online on Twitter and be like, oh, you stole the Elvis cover. Oh, you stole the Clash cover. Or did you know it was an Elvis cover? And I'm like, yeah, I did know, you guys. Thank you for.
Yeah, you're one of those well-researched comics.
Yeah. I don't usually go blundering off and not. I just thought the lettering looked cool. And also, I thought it would be better to have it be in black and white because it's a color photo. Of course, it's a color photo, but
real life is in color. Yes.
Yeah, I thought it would be better to have it. It would look, we've done a bunch of ones. Then we've done a lot of Blue Note type jazz covers for the last few albums, and so I decided to do something that people might like.
And this is the 10th album, if my research is correctly done.
But, I never counted, and people tell me it is, so it must be. Yeah, I think so. I made a couple in England that were kind of out of my control for a company called Laughing Stock, and one of them is called Greg Proops Live, which I always called Greg Proops Live. But I didn't get to name those or choose the artwork. And so I've taken a little more of a hand in it since I made the other ones.
Right. Well, you mentioned seeing Bob Dylan the night the photo was taken. How many of the songs did you recognize that night? Was that one of those mumbling Dylan performances where he doesn't talk to the crowd?
Exactly. And it was also the new album. Oh, well, new then. I don't know if he has another one since then. It was called Rough and Rowdy Ways. It was from like a year ago. And he sings in a kind of a blues hasp that I think he would have loved in 1962, because the now some kind of murder most foul, and then murder most foul. So to answer your question, no. What was great though was he made everybody wear masks and he made everyone give up their phone, and you couldn't even bring a drink in the theater. So you had to sit and watch the goddamn show. He sat behind an upright piano, so he was hidden for a bunch of it, which was awesome. And also, he's turned the lights down so hard on stage that he's like a blur. So he doesn't look old. He doesn't look anything, like we saw him in New York about 4 or 5 years ago at the Beacon. And he was a little more, and he was doing part of that. You remember how he was doing like the Sinatra songbook at one point? Like he was kind of doing American, he did Autumn Leaves and stuff, and in that one he kept coming out from behind the thing and standing up and fronting the band. And I said, the lights are so low, I can't. And my wife Jennifer, who's a huge Dylan fan, turned to me and said, that's because he's any age you want him to be. Like there were people there that were in their 70s and 80s. There were people there my age, 60s. And then there are people there from their 30s and 40s who, to him, to them, he's an idea, So I kind of appreciated it. And then we played, I'm sorry, we're talking about Dylan and all, but
I'll talk to you about your album, your book, your amazing career and all that. But You know, what you're saying about Dylan right here, there's one video clip that I saw of Dylan from the mid 80s that totally changed my mind on him. I don't remember where this is from, but someone posted this on YouTube where he's in some parking lot before a concert and he's making small talk with these kids and the professional wrestler Jake the Snake Roberts' dad. And he says to the kid, "So what do you guys listen to? Rat? Ozzy?" And you go, "Wait, Bob Dylan knows who Rat and Ozzy are?"
Yeah. Rat.
So, yeah, I love Rat. I think they were one of the most underrated bands from that era who get a lot of flack, but they were kind of the second coming of Van Halen in a good way. But let's talk about
I love
Greg
it.
Proops right
Were
here.
they the ones who did round and round?
That was the first or second hit. Yeah, the LA Sunset Strip scene, which I'm sure is your favorite ever. So you have this new record, you have the winter tour coming up, the Whose Line Is It Anyway tour. We never know when we're going to see pop up doing voiceovers because, hey, you're one of the comedians who can do kids programming because they haven't been canceled yet. There was a memoir a couple of years, etc. What do I call you career-wise? Are you still comedian Greg Proops?
Yeah, I'm a comedian. They call me an actor all the time, and I'm like, I can act, and I've been on TV shows acting, but I kind of gave that up a long time ago as far as a title. Yeah, comedian is just fine with me. Because I'll do a little stand-up, a podcast, improv, whatever. And that's really what I want to do. I want to make the jokes.
Is it the same material that you do here versus the UK? The reason I ask that is, yes, it's English, but you first found success in the UK, and they're generally much bigger venues than they here are in your native states.
Absolutely. I know I have a more of a stand-up act that I will do. The album I improvised, so I don't know that I could remember it. I mean, I could remember it, but those are stories that I was telling on the night and whatnot. So I don't know that I would get on stage unless I was doing a theater. Like I did a set in London at this outdoor thing like a month ago, and I did jokes. I did like jokes from my act because I'm not going to get up there and tell them a long story about being in a cave in Jamaica or whatever. Also, the comic ahead of me did maybe a 10-minute routine about how two dogs were having sex. So sometimes the context of what you're doing kind of dictates the jokes you're going to do. As far as changing material for England, no, they want jokes. If you're doing stand-up, they want jokes. If you're doing the podcast, they want you to talk about all the things that they don't get to talk about, which is how they are. You know, their lack of warmth, their inability to express themselves, the fact that they've let their government completely get away from them and go fascist. Where we in America, they were so worried about us. They really were. British people really worry about America and whether we're going to go Nazi. And then their whole country went Nazi right out from under them. And we sort of held the line, which surprised them. And I don't know that it delighted them, but it surprised them. They really thought 45 was going to win again. And I had to talk so many English people down off the wall and go like, he's not going to win. And then he didn't. But then they let so yeah, their sensibilities are different. They don't like sentimentality very much. If you tell them you love them, they get really uncomfortable. If you say, let's have a hand for the comic ahead of me, they won't applaud. If you say, where are you from? They won't tell you where they're from. They don't give a shit where anyone's from. They don't do any of that recognition stuff that American audiences do. They don't go woo woo or whatever.
Oh,
they will heckle you.
Are they wooers in England? The answer is no.
No, they will heckle you and say get off or tell a joke or whatever. So they
can
be brutal.
You? Like they do with the net worth and all that. They throw the bottles and that kind of stuff.
No, it's not that bad. I mean, you can get brutally heckled, that's for sure. I haven't done a stand-up club there in ages, so I couldn't tell you what it was like on a Saturday night. But the commercial clubs that aren't the indie clubs are just like in America. It's a lot of bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, what they call, in their awesomely sexist way, hen parties. And so it's a little bit more of an, like my issue with comedy is that it became a grinding corporate thing. And the big overarching goal of all evil producers of comedy and every kind of entertainment is to produce content, as they call it, where we as creators would call it, what we're doing. Maybe it's not art, but it's craft, and I think stand-up is a craft, and
Yes.
at its best, it's an art, like Richard Pryor or Lily Tomlin or George Carlin, or they make it art. A lot of people are operating at the very bottom level of craft. In other words, they can get up on stage and they can put some words together, but after that, I would be pretty suspect about their intentions and or their talent level. And with me, it's always about, I always think of that line in Bull Durham. He says when Kevin Costner Crash says to Nuke, you don't respect yourself, that's your problem. You don't respect the game, that's my problem. And that's how I feel about comedy.
But you're one of those comics who gathers with the other comics and calls people hacks, but in a loving, informed kind of way.
I actually try never to do that on stage. I've taken part in it. Andy Kindler is much better at just decimating other comics and calling them hacks and Nazis and stuff. I'm a little freer about it now because I think we're really at an apotheosis here. We're at a point where we're making that there has to be a line of demarcation, and the line of demarcation is: are you a Nazi? Do you believe in science? Are you a bigot? And there's a bunch of comics who fall down on the other side of that, and I'm not having it. You know what I mean? Lenny Bruce didn't die so you could be mean about trans people, so fuck you.
Well, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, that Lenny Bruce is just a tiny bit different than the real Lenny Bruce was.
Well, Mrs. Maisel's supposed to be Joan, I think, and I knew Joan, and I don't know that Joan would really love the show that much. Maybe Melissa does. Joan was a really amazing. My favorite comics were Robin and Joan that I knew. I mean, I met Carlin, and he was very professional and succinct in person. And on stage, he was a magnificent. His writing, the majesty of how he was able to put things together reminded me more of a playwright than a stand-up comic, and that's why I think he ascended to. When you watch his HBO specials and stuff like that, he literally sit down and there's no the economy. Beckett is who I think of when I used to see him on like Carson or Jay Leno toward the end. Mm-hmm. He would come on and he'd say one line, and the line would be so perfectly formulated that he'd thought of, because he did not improvise. He wasn't an improviser. That it carried the complete impact intellectually and emotionally on what he meant to say. And I think that's a boiling down process. I'm like I said, I'm all for comedy. I think comedy's great, and I think the young comics are way more aware than we were. When I started, guys are doing Chinese driver jokes and my girlfriend's so fat and all that shit. And all that stuff still exists. By and large, I think the comics are a lot hipper. There's a lot more women. There's a lot more Asian people. There's a lot more Arab people. There's a lot more. Yeah. That's the best part of comedy today. The worst part of comedy today is that we went through 2 years of the biggest racial and civil rights reckoning in the history of the country during the plague, had a Nazi as a president, and that we came out of that with a bunch of stand-ups talking about their fucking career on stage. And that, to me, like, fuck, have you nothing else to talk about? Who gives a shit about your audition or your emotional life, really?
With Carlin, not to make this about me, but I had the pleasure of interviewing him. He did not have the pleasure. When I was 18 or 19 years old, he didn't like me. Joan Rivers did not like me at all. A lot of, you're 18, you script your questions, you don't know how to talk to people off the cuff. So George Carlin in that era, I think it was July or August 2001. Do you remember what his stand-up special that was supposed to come out around 9/11, what it was called?
Wasn't it die? Something about.
I kind of like it when a lot of people die.
Yeah, like when a lot of people die. I was gonna say, and also wasn't one called Death is for the Living or whatever. Like he had a few that were so morbid.
Yeah, Angry George Carlin, I really liked better than the hippy dippy weatherman and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Was it fuck Lance Armstrong? That was my favorite opening line of any of his. And this was a man who claimed to never cover current events, right? He had eschewed that for the big picture, as he said. And I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. I'm above all that because I want to shoot at both sides. And then he comes on and says, fuck Lance Armstrong, which was my other
Well,
favorite line is home style, homemade, home this, home that. What's homemade anymore? Speed.
well, if I could throw you another compliment before I leave you alone for the day, it's that I admire with your career how you're able to take the most mainstream of projects and then at the same time do exactly what you want to do in your pet projects, such as your podcast. That's just you being you, liking what you like. And you're able to alternate that. There's a few comics that are able to do that, like every now and then when David Cross decides to do a squeakquel and then gets in trouble for that. But
Yeah.
you've been able to do that for 25, 30 years. When did you kind of realize that you were able to do Bob the Builder and your podcast and things were going to be okay?
Well, I got lucky, I think, early on being able to go to England. I was in a bar drinking in 1992 with Tom Rhodes, the comedian.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Tom Rhodes turned to me and said, dude, aren't you on a television show in England? And I said, I am, Tom. And he went, manhandle that bad boy. And
Yeah.
so,
Is that the Tom Rhodes who made the whole career out of the Netherlands, basically?
yeah.
Yeah.
And he was the one who, with the impetus, I thought he's right. So I actually, in those days, because this is what you did, got on the phone and called a bunch of clubs in England and booked myself a tour, and then a Scottish comic group for me. Then I started going over there. That was the end of 92, right when Clinton got elected. And then I started getting some TV shows in England and then moved over there and all that. But England gave me the opportunity to, you were able to write and do improv and do stand up. And then the podcast 15, whatever it is, 13 years ago, whatever, I thought was the next step in, as one of my managers used to say, taking back the means of production. And so I am lucky. I really am. Sometimes I get, huffy like anyone else, that I'm not richer or that I'm not more whatever. But on the other hand, I would never, as my wife always says to me, you can bitch about it all you like. Would you have wanted to be in a writer's room for 20 years? And the answer is no. I couldn't have handled being in a writer's room. I don't like organization very much. I want to get high and make my albums. I want to get high and make my podcast. I want to run around the world. I love traveling. So, the trade-off is, I think, because I'm outspoken about politics and because I'm not a sexist asshole, it might have hurt me a little in show business. I think show business is run by conservative sexist assholes, and they don't really like it. You mean, let me put it this way. George Carlin might be one of the great stand-up comics the country's ever produced, along with, as I said, Pryor and Lilly and whatnot. George Carlin was never a television star because they never knew what to do with George Carlin on
You
television.
don't count finally collect commercials as being a TV star?
Right. They found him a thing to do, and I know his producers, Rocco and Neil, who made all those HBO shows with him. That was the perfect vehicle for him, to give him an hour to rant and rave and be the fucking nasty, angry guy from the Bronx that he was genius.
Yeah.
As far as him fitting into a mainstream thing or being on a sitcom or being on a sketch show or some crap like that, it wasn't going to happen. So I kind of like to feel that I'm able to do that thing where I'm a little bit, I'm a little hip for the room, but I also do the most mainstream schlock you've ever seen in your life. Like Who's Lined? Which is still on the air, by the way. We have a new season coming out. And everyone will think we broke the strike to do it, but we shot it in January.
Amazing. Well, the last question before I let you go, we were talking about at the top, The Clash. You've seen Bob Dylan. What's the last concert that you went to by choice?
Oh, we went to Buddy Guy last week here in Los Angeles because he's 87 and he's threatening to hang it up, which I thought, you're not going to retire, but maybe he is. I don't know. He said it was his last tour, and he was really good. And he brought out Jimmy Vaughn, Stevie Ray's brother, and and they had a jam at the end and everything. And watching this old blues guy do the vaudeville shtick that he's developed. I'm sure 60, I mean, he's 87, so I'm guessing he's been on stage for maybe 75 years,
Yeah.
you know? He was doing jokes from the antediluvian swamp period, and the white crowd at the Hollywood Bowl was losing their minds. They'd never seen this shit before, and I was really proud of him for that. He did, like, I remember seeing Merle Haggard years ago open for Bob Dylan, and he did a joke where he goes, "Now I'd like to introduce the band," and the whole band turned to each other and shook hands. And it was at the Wiltern in LA, and this Richard Lewis was sitting in front of me. That's how, it was like really rich people at the, and everyone burst out laughing. And I'm like, that is a country joke from like the Grand Ole Opry, like, so the mixture of vaudeville and hipness is always something that I've enjoyed. But so Buddy Guy, and then the week before that, we went to see, 2 weeks ago, we went to see Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Marcus Miller, Joni Mitchell came out. It was a tribute to Wayne Shorter. So,
who has
jazz
a new
and blues.
documentary. So the bottom line is, if it's somebody's threatening to retire, Greg Proops is going to see them live. That's the.
My wife and I always say that. Do go out and see the old artists, because there's no guarantee they're going to be around forever. Dylan is back out again, I think, and he's really, it's worth seeing. It really is. And also, Arturo Sandoval, the Latin jazz great, was a protege of Dizzy Gillespie. We saw him last year, but he's here in LA, and I think he's up in San Francisco this week. Really loud, frenetic bop, Latin bop, and it's just so worth it. It's really, and then he gives a dissertation on jazz during the show. He's as well, and this delighted me, and I think you'll like this, Darren. In between shows, we went to the early show over here. There's a jazz club called Catalina.
Yeah.
And we, in between shows, we were leaving, and he went outside and smoked a cigar with the crowd. And I was like, he's 80 years old, like.
They didn't have to pay for the meet and greet VIP experience of being with the star of the evening.
Right? He just went outside and lit a cigar up, and he plays horn, like and then he went back in and blew his brains out. And I'm like, you are my hero, man. Oh, his wife was in the front row and shit. He went over and sang to her. It was just like, I don't know. I have nothing but, some people say, well, people get old, they lose a step or whatever, but I haven't found that. All of the artists that I've seen in their 70s and 80s have been smashing. So yeah, I would say go see young bands too. You want to support young artists, but yes, you're right. Anybody that's about to retire, I'm there.
Well, the tour that the wife and I saw a couple nights ago with Alice Cooper, artist in the 70s, Rob Zombie, almost 60, Ministry, almost 60.
Ministry.
Filter, probably Richard Patrick's 55. He's that might be your next tour, but wear some great earplugs for that one. But
oh, no kidding, man.
But Greg,
well, on our Whose Line tour, I call us the Antique Roadshow. So,
well, thank you for the many, many years of great comedy, both the Whose Line, the stand-up, telling it like it is with the podcast, and really looking forward to whatever is coming next for me in the future, man.
Hey, Darren, I really enjoyed myself. Not like George Carlin. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Paltrocast.